And we're live.
All
I
right.
just smiles, everybody.
I like that. That's good. Thank
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of the Curious Leader's Path. Today, um, I am here with Catherine and Joanne, and I'm Todd, and we are talking about navigating culture wars. And I think that's a charged title. I think
Mhm.
that's kind of juicy. So maybe we can spend a little time talking about what we mean when we're talking about culture and culture wars. What do you guys think?
I'm gonna laugh right off the bat because you introduced Kat as Catherine. So I have a
Oh my
thing
God, did I?
about names. I'm making sure I've got the right name.
Wait a minute. Yeah, did I do that? Did I? Oh,
And you know what's
okay. So y'all know that I've had a terrible.
I know.
So I am so sorry, Kat. I did not.
it's all right. And just so you know,
I've only known you for 2 years.
it's but can I tell you
I
a
only
little
see you
secret?
every week. Yes.
I always was so Katarina is actually my middle name, and
Uh-huh.
I didn't start using it until I was 19. And when I finally
Okay.
got my birth certificate when I went to university around that time, I
Yeah.
realized that I always thought my name was Katarina, but in German it's spelled Catherine. So my name is legally Catherine.
How did you know?
Well,
How did you know?
ESP pod,
I'm
ESP.
clairvoyant.
There you go.
Oh, okay. Well,
Now going back to
on that auspicious beginning, who wants to kick us off on what's culture?
Well, I mean, I'll start off with culture. I think, and we were talking about it before. Like, there's probably different levels of culture. The culture that I'm most familiar with is the culture within organizations, right? Even the cultures within families too. But this is where we have a leader who has beliefs and values, behaviors all lined up to those values and beliefs that could be like usually most times it is the core values of the company. Sometimes it's off a little bit. And the same thing with families. Like you have certain families which will have beliefs and values, which could be radically different between one family to another in terms of how they're bringing up their kids or not, and their how best to
Mhm.
kind of do that. So that's what when I think of culture, that's what I would say culture is.
Mhm.
Yeah, I don't know if anyone wants to add or change that.
I would add to that and say the leaders generally start the culture, but a
Right.
lot of times they also inherit it if they're taking over a role of an existing team or existing
So
organization.
hard. So
And
hard.
what's interesting is if you look at social dynamics and social network theory and different things like that,
Yeah.
what all of those things point to is that people who tend to be the stronger personalities within those teams, even if they don't have official responsibility, they can collectively they can really shape and influence the culture. So it's not necessarily a reflection of the leader, although it definitely does start with that in a lot of situations. But then over the years, as different layers, people come and go, there's different power dynamics, there's different dynamics within the organization, new leaders come in, etc. What ends up being a culture is usually a real amalgamation of a range of influences.
Mhm.
What,
Well,
what,
and
what,
and 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 grabbing that influence is um, celebrated and has been for generations. Like we've all heard about the squeaky wheel gets the grease, right?
oh, I
Yeah.
see.
Yeah, that's what immediately came up when you were talking, Gab.
Hmm.
It just what came up for me. So it was this. I remember going back to a time where I took over a team, and it was exactly that. And I wasn't a pretty young leader at that particular point in time. Didn't really quite understand the type of culture that was there. I was a different culture than the team, and they did have a certain culture and a certain. There were certain individuals that people looked at and followed, and they had their own,
Yeah.
beliefs and it made it that's where the
And then you could
war
get
became.
subcultures.
Yeah. Yeah. And but you know what, there's a war that came out of all this, right? Because it was me bringing this new culture against the culture of some of
Yeah.
these team members that eventually started to leave. But
Yeah.
and eventually I left too, right? But yeah, that's what came up for me. Oh, wow.
Mhm.
That was a memory.
And And the wars piece is, so it can be within organizations where you get different subcultures that are warring against each other, whether it's different departments or subgroups within departments. It could be across functional lines because there's, if you look at the finance department, that's one type of culture generally because of the function versus the marketing and salespeople, right? But then you also get culture wars in terms of how we choose to live our lives, what our politics are, lots of other factors like that. So when I think we started talking about culture wars, I think it came up because we were talking about some of the things that are happening and how people are just sort of getting pitted against each other based on their beliefs, based on their identities, based on, they're just pitted against each other and they're just not trying to understand each other's cultures.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and some are just like letting it go and just following it, right? Because there's I got to keep a job, I got to do whatever. So I guess I'll do whatever minimal I need to do in order to get that job done. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's surviving, not thriving, right? Like
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
There's something that's imminently not fulfilling about having to live, within that context. And and I think that's very true. It's really interesting too because culture war within the context of a team or organization or even a family is what's coming up for me when I think of culture wars and I think of it within that context is that there's many different layers of culture that are at work, right? And so, so this is the culture that I have within my family because we have a shared set of values and beliefs and things and the way that we do things or whatever, right? And then there might be, a shared value within, if I'm lucky, within my community, within, the people that live within proximity. And maybe we all go to the same place of worship. Maybe we all, maybe we have some shared experience. It's that whole, human society really belongs in a village kind of mentality. And then there's where I work, and that could be something different too. And it may or may not be, like you said, Joanne, informed by whatever the quote unquote corporate values are. Although I have to admit that the idea of values in a corporation kind of, it always seems this to me, but we can leave that one alone. But then we can just go sort of even larger than that, right? And we start looking at sort of political entities, right? And cultures within cities, cultures within the province, within nations, and or within the political divides within a nation. Because when I think of culture wars, I think of partisan politics. I think of the left and the right, and they can't get along, and everyone's right and everyone's wrong, and it's not, and I have, and you both know that I'm well into all of that and where I stand on most of it as well. So it's really, really interesting because the thing about it is the culture that you're describing is beautiful and useful.
Oh yeah.
And the conflict is dangerous and damaging. And we've had lots of conversations. We've had lots of conversations about how conflict doesn't have to be that.
Yeah, exactly.
And it wasn't for the longest time. Like if you think about what life was like 10, 20 years ago, we had different cultures. We had conflicting cultures, but they were not necessarily in conflict. They were just different cultures, but we were able somehow to navigate and let sleeping lions sleep, or whatever that expression, sleeping dogs lie, or whatever that expression is. And it's not that things were perfect 10, 20 years ago, but it feels like everything is now a culture war. Yeah. It really feels like everybody at some point in time, and sometimes some people have multiple wars that they're fighting, but it seems like everybody is really threatened by other cultures. And I think the sense of threat has increased, and maybe there are real reasons to have a stronger sense of threat. But I think that's why we're using this word of culture wars versus just different cultures or cultural conflict or whatever. It's now truly wars where people are antagonistic towards each other and feeling like it is a survival game.
What comes up for me is there's a big O.
I'm
interested.
I've got a lot. That's interesting.
Well, I guess for me, the way I look at it is I'm not sure if it's a threat as much as the fact that there's just so many variables of so many different things that it's overwhelming for people to
Mhm.
be in. And it's just
because of
it's just
layers.
bec- yeah, it's very difficult and challenging for some
Mhm.
people to be in that amount of flux or of differences that they're surrounded by, right? So and being pulled in so many different ways, maybe that's a better expression. Because that 20 years ago we weren't pulled as many different directions, and now we can
Mm.
feel a lot of pull. And I think that causes a lot of stress on the
Mhm.
human's ability to deal with it. So they'll be more on edge in my mind. So
Mhm.
Mm,
ooh, what did I say?
I,
Go for it.
I still, it's okay. So just I'm gonna blurt. I'm just gonna blurt,
Go.
because both of those statements sound, and I know this isn't what you mean, but it sounds like pining for the good old days. And and
Mm,
and the thing is, and we know this now, right? Is that the good old days were only good for some of us.
Mm.
And I think maybe what we're experiencing as culture war is perhaps a crescendo of difference that's coming up sort of differently. So it's funny because before when we were talking about what we were going to talk about, this didn't come up, so I don't know what I was going
of course.
to say. But it's just it sort of feels like they were good old days, and they were good old days for some of us, and I was one of those people for whom it was the good old days because it was, things seemed easier, because there were less things to think about and there were less others, right? Other cultures, other differences, other whatever, to think about. But the truth is there wasn't less. I just didn't need to see it.
Or yeah, or wasn't aware of it, or whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
Because yeah, and I can totally see that. I just think that we the technology and the state that we're in is much faster. That data is
Yep.
much, and information is much faster than we've ever
Mhm.
had it. So,
Mhm.
and I think this is where we get the pulls. People may not be pining, and maybe they are pining for the good old days, but our systems are actually created such that there's this normal, right? And it's like the homeostasis, right? There was a
Mhm.
this is the way it was, and all of a sudden the technology went like whoop, and now we're
Yeah.
like, now it's just like we have to get to another level, right, of homeostasis. We can't go back to where it was before. It will never be that way.
Mhm.
We
Mhm.
need to kind of get to this, but the thing is our minds aren't developed that way, not for everyone, to get to that next stage, right? So,
Right.
and I think this is where a lot of the curiosity comes into place, and then and how can I reduce my level of excitement, or whatever the case may be? How can I be in this space, be curious about what's going on, right? So that I can learn how to navigate that space, right? Whatever
Mhm.
that may be. Like it requires that openness to kind of learn, right? Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah,
Marcus just
and
put a comment here.
I know. Also,
Yeah.
Mark. Hey, Mark. It's good to see you. I haven't talked to Mark in a long time. I'm so glad you're here. Let's.
Yeah,
I'm gonna bring. I'm gonna
love
bring this
that.
up. I'm gonna bring this up. Let's show everyone, and then I can read it too. So technology amplified these differences, or at least awareness to them. They were always there. We didn't have it in our faces all the time, hence the anxiety increase. And I can't agree with that more. I think that's really, really apt. And the way that you've brought up technology, Joanne, also is like that we have more access to more stuff, right?
Yeah.
It's just hi. Hi, Mark. We have more access to more stuff, and more stuff is differences. And I guess what's coming up for me, I'm getting really excited. What's coming up for me when we're talking
Yay,
about things like
folks.
this is like, if I've got access to more stuff and my culture forms part of my identity, and my identity's fixed, and this is something we did talk about before, then it becomes really challenging, right? And that's where that destructive conflict comes
Can I
into
go
play.
back and talk about? I want to respond to what you guys were talking about, Todd, Joanne, and also what Mark had written. It's not just that technology has amplified things. I think the world is significantly more complex than it was 10 years ago. 10 years ago,
Okay.
the US was in charge. China
Mhm.
was definitely growing, but not flexing its muscle. And of
Mhm.
course, as it's gotten bigger and stronger economically, of course it's going to flex its muscle. Like, it's naive of us to believe that they wouldn't. And it's ridiculous of us to say they shouldn't. Russia is in a slightly different scenario, but they're also flexing their muscles. So this is happening all around the world. So the geopolitical conflict that's increasing is a reflection of us going from a unipolar world back to a multipolar world, which is a more common state. So from a geopolitical standpoint, the world has gotten much more complex. Given COVID, given the geopolitical conflicts, given a bunch of other things, our supply chains have been breaking down. That increases complexity. Over the
Environment.
last 20 environment, absolutely
Yeah.
huge
Yeah.
environmental crises. And we all know how bad it could potentially get within the next 5 or 10 years. That's a huge deal. That's giving anxiety to people in incredible amounts.
Mhm.
There's social change. The people who have been at the losing end, for the people who didn't have the privilege that a lot of us did growing up and elsewhere, they're fighting back. Black Lives Matter, other groups as well, which for very good reasons they're fighting back, but that creates complexity. People are losing faith in established organizations. The Catholic Church has had to, around the world, acknowledge what their wrongs have been. It's a question of whether they really have, but that's, at least all around the world that the Catholic Church has been operating. There's clear evidence that they completely abuse their power in a range of ways. And I'm not picking on the Catholic Church in particular, but there's such an esteemed organization that has done so many egregious things, and people are finally starting to hold them to account and not believing that they always had the best interest. We're questioning the police. We're questioning the military. We're questioning hockey in Canada, right? Like
Yeah.
and all the stuff that's happening in the hockey world right now
Yeah.
is not new. There were books written in the 90s about these problems. But what people are doing is starting to recognize that we don't have heroes and villains. We have a lot of people who are heroic in certain situations and villainous at the same time. Or they might have been painted as villains, but they actually have some pretty heroic tendencies. So what we're recognizing is how much more complex the world is than we admitted in the past. We also have 20 or 30 years of downsizing and efficiencies and right sizing and whatever beautiful euphemisms we have, where people at work have been under such immense pressure for pretty well our professional lives. That's been happening. So people don't have any extra energy. Now we're going into, or we've been in inflation, interest rate rises. So now there's huge financial pressures for people at home. And the list can go on and on and on, right? So the complexities that people are dealing with is, I think it's actually unprecedented in some ways. But now, if we layer on top of that even more, that when I look at my parents' generation who survived war and survived all sorts of atrocities and displacement and whatever, they had much more resiliency because they had to. And they were way more pragmatic, and they had skill sets because they lived in this very complex, uncertain, threatening, frightening world at different points in their lives. And we've grown up in increasing wealth, increasing stability, increasing everything good. And all of a sudden now the economy is coming to a screeching halt. We have multi-billionaires, and there's actually a question, who's going to be the first personal trillionaire, was an article I just read recently. So if you think about all of these social, economic, technology, political, environmental changes, among others, we are living in a seriously complex world. And not only is it putting more pressure on people, not only are the power structures shifting and changing, but we also don't have the skill set to deal with it.
And I think that's the nail on the head, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's the skill set.
Yeah.
Like, and what is that? Because what came up for me as you were talking, Kat, was especially when you said we don't have heroes and villains anymore. We have people who are sometimes heroic and sometimes villainous,
Yeah.
almost like they're human or something.
Oh my God.
Right?
I'm a
And-
hero all the time.
I know you are to me.
Got you fooled. Great.
And I think that's just because one of the other things we talked about in the past too is rehumanizing leadership, and and what but other than that, things are good.
Yeah. I have a great dog. I love my dog. Yeah, it's good.
Okay, I'm sorry. So this needs to be kept in perpetuity because everyone needs to know what we're laughing at. And it's
Can you
this.
post it? Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, it is good.
Mark, your comedy.
So maybe it's not that I'm villainous. Maybe I'm just the eternal pessimist. Who knows?
No, but I think here's the thing. What truth and reconciliation, right? In order for there to be reconciliation, there must be truth. And I think that what you are doing right now, Katerina, is being our truth teller.
Yeah.
Because here it is. Like, here is this big messy structure, right?
Yeah.
That has a bunch of these interlocking, intersectional cultures going at it and in conflict. And well, what are we choosing to do? Because we have a choice.
Mm-hmm.
All leaders have a choice, and we're all leaders.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
I can't read this. It's 100% Kat. Bruno. Technology giving society access to. I'm going to bring this up too. Right. Technology giving society access to look at a big picture and a lot of facts that were usually hidden in the past. That's absolutely true. So we have more access to data than we've ever had before.
Yeah. And getting our voices heard and hearing airing our opinions back to this culture based on back to the beliefs.
And it's hardening our
teams.
identities.
Yeah.
And it's hardening our identities rather than the other way around.
Yeah. Because really we're going into threat response. We don't have the competencies to deal with this complexity on average. I mean, of course, there's individual people who have different levels of abilities. But when we don't have the abilities to respond to something appropriately and we don't have a track record or a history or preparation for what we're going into, of course, our nervous system is going to go into a threat response, which is fight, flight, or freeze, or fawn. Yeah, they recently added the fawn, which is basically sucking up to people for survival, which is a very wise survival strategy in a lot of situations. Yeah. And that's what we're seeing is a lot of people going into fight, which is the culture wars piece. The flight is the people who are just basically, I think a lot of the pot shops, a lot of the marijuana stores are cashing in on the fact that people are with way too much anxiety and they just need to check out somehow. The flight. So that's the flight. The freeze is there's a lot of people that are just kind of walking around like zombies and just kind of getting through their day, but really not living life, not doing anything. And the fawning is we're seeing an awful lot of fawning where people, I mean, think about all the people that are openly supporting Trump. And I don't want to pick on Trump because I actually don't think he's a problem. I think there's a much bigger problem that's allowing people like Trump to come to power. Yeah. So, but a lot of those people that are voting for Trump are kind of fawning. And I think there's much more dynamic. It's too simple to say that those are the fawning people, but they're willing to say anything as long as they can stay on his good side, because it's very likely that he is going to become the next president again. Right. So.
And what comes up to me with everything that's going on, because it's what can I control? What can I can't control?
Yeah.
Right. What can I control in terms of the changes around me? Knowing all this information, it's great to know all this information. Wonderful. We sometimes turn off and people don't listen to news anymore because there's just too much disinformation. But it's for me. I can choose just I hear it. But this some of these things are out of my control or in my control. So the getting back to the culture war kind of thing with everything that you're saying, like, I mean, this isn't necessarily, in our organizations, we don't necessarily always talk about all these different things, but they're there, right? So we feel it. sometimes we talk about it, sometimes we don't, or within our families and all that stuff. So that stress is there, that anxiety is there. What do we do about all this? Like, well, how do we kind of be with that, right?
Mhm.
How do we start our learning, right, to be with that?
Well, I'm going to return to the title of our broadcast again. I'd be willing to bet that this has something to do with curiosity. And what can I be curious about? And and what's so interesting to me as you talk about that, Joanne, is that, and I'm being reductive when I say that this is the answer to everything, but it is part of the answer to so many things. And when I'm in the dysregulated nervous system state that you were describing, Kat, then I don't have the capacity to think about anything other than my own survival. But when I do have that capacity to think about something other than my own survival, well, what am I curious about? And my identity doesn't need to be etched in stone from that place, does it? I can be fluid because I can add stuff or remove stuff without it affecting who I am. I can still be the essential me. I think that that's something that more leaders need. Not just here, not just in corporations or politics or whatever. I think it's just like, it's something that all leaders are going to need to cultivate. And having a way to do that is really, really important. And we've touched on this too. Like, it starts here. It starts here.
If you're going to go into war, you're going to need to know what you're going to stand for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you need to know how you're going to operate in it. Yeah.
Yeah. What's at stake?
What's at stake? What do we really want to hold on to? And I think what we need to do is find different ways to define ourselves. Yeah. So one thing that we talked about offline before is identities are really at the root of it. Who do I want to be? How do I want to see myself? How do I want other people to see me? And really recognizing that our culture has focused so much on our status, our roles, our sociodemographic issues, right? Or sociodemographic metrics. And I would suggest those things are important, but if that's the identity that we're willing to die for, then we're really in a problematic state. Because if we really want to change how we're doing things so that we can actually reverse what's happening in the environment, I don't know if reverse is the right word, but let's be optimistic and say reverse what's happening in the environment, to rebalance social justice so more people are included, we really have to rethink what are the identities that we really want to hang on to, and what are the identities that really actually are important. And I would suggest human is the first identity. Connection of some type of sort needs to really be part of our identity, as opposed to what do I have? I think that's sort of the root of a lot of things. And I am pro-capitalist. This is not an anti-capitalist kind of statement that I'm making.
We can't agree on everything, Kat.
No, we can't. Yeah. And I think that's this identity topic is something that I think we need to talk a lot more about, and we have to be willing to come and be curious. And being curious also means feeling challenged and being comfortable with that and thinking about it, and then making decisions a few weeks again later, and hopefully eventually allowing ourselves to evolve gradually. This is not an overnight thing.
What comes up for me is like the identity in relationship to something. Like my identity is only there when it comes up in relationship to a thing. So I always look at like what is that thing that I matters hugely to me, right? So one of my beliefs is I can't live in a world without hope, right? So that's fundamentally who I am. I will break down my identity in order to ensure that that happens, whatever we want to state identity. So if I have a bias or an unconscious, like I got a big helicopter coming over our house right now. Interesting. But it's gonna fly me and take me away. So I think we will change if we want to. This thing that highly matters to us, right? We will need, in order to get to that. We will discover things where we'll need to change about ourselves, right? In relationship to that thing. So having something bigger than us to aspire to, right, is super important in terms of forming our identity or who we are, or figuring out what we need to be in order to make that thing happen.
Something to believe, something to really genuinely believe.
Yeah.
And I love that.
And we can have different beliefs. That's okay,
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
But so.
Absolutely. Yeah. 30 minutes went by so fast.
31:20.
But this was a good conversation. Is there anything that Kat or Joanne that you'd like to say before we sign off?
Be curious.
I
thought long and hard about that.
It's a good one. It always works.
I just, if we're going into wars if it's over culture or whatever, that curiosity is actually that understanding that we need to have of the other individual, understanding, why and what they're doing, and or whatever it is that you're against. But I think that's really important to understand where their beliefs are, where they're going to, and then yours, and then seeing where there's a difference, because that a lot of times is where the warring is happening, right?
Yeah.
So
you know what I'd add is, in addition to understanding other people's beliefs and cultures, understanding our own.
Yeah.
And really questioning, like, when something's important to me, ask why. Why is it? Why is that important? And the answer,
where did it come from?
Because it's always been important. And is that a good enough reason? Maybe it is. I'm not here to say it is or it isn't, but at least know what you stand for and why.
And where it comes from.
That's what I got her to say. Yeah. Because that's something to be curious about too. You don't have to even look outside your own body to start off with the curiosity. You can start right here, right at home. That was fun. Thank you both. Thank you for this.
Thank you.
This was a fun conversation.
And thank you to the audience
so much. And yes, thank you, audience. Thank you, everyone, for showing up. Mark, I haven't seen you in so long. Thank you so much. And Cindy and Bruno, it's always good to see you too.
Yeah, thank you.
And everyone else. And I'm going to sign off. So thanks, and we'll see you in a couple weeks. All right.
Bye.
Bye.